Lou Pugliaresi, President, Energy Policy Research Foundation.
Late in the day.
We're very much focused on energy policy. We testified before Congress a lot, and I have a few things that are similar to Kevin's, but I think I can skip over those. So let's go to the first slide. Okay. One of the issues we have is how to visualize data to policymakers. We spend a lot of time on this because these issues are very complex. So we have to find a way for them to understand what's happening with pictures. I mean, they're complicated graphs, but as such, they're pictures. So we're going to start out with a small animation. Next slide. This is going to show you how power resources are distributed around the world by fuel type. So we need to, there we go, okay. You can see here the blue is hydro, the red is coal, we have the solar resources. So you see the U.S.?
Get in the mic. Speak in the mic.
Oh, yeah. Okay, now we're moving to Europe. Notice the lack of power in Africa. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Now we're moving to India. You see a lot of solar and a lot of coal. Now let's take a look at China. And you know, one of the things this helps with policymakers is they get a sense of the scale problem. They generally have no sense of and now we're moving to South Asia. And this can be seen on YouTube as well with music, if you like. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, so this is a map of Africa. And one of the interesting things about Africa, when you saw that picture, is that in Africa today, if you look at these, the different shades of the color on there, if the lighter the shade, the less power. Now, there are 600 million people on the African continent who have no access to reliable power, virtually no access to power. This is quite interesting. In New York City, where there are 8 million people, they generate more power in a year than 600 million people in Africa have access to in a year. New York does not have lots of electricity because it's rich. It has a lot of electricity. They are rich because they have a lot of electricity. And so if you care about the developing world, if you care about lifting the human condition, much as what Kevin showed you, you need more power. You need more energy. Next slide. Okay, so this is I think won't spend much time on this, but this is a slide that looks at the relationship from something called the Human Development Index and the amount of energy. And what we did is then we pieced it out into gallons of oil equivalent. And you can see that the poorest countries have like a half a gallon per oil equivalent per day, and the most wealthy countries have 3.5 gallons. So having access to this energy, using this energy, is very important to lift the human condition. Next slide. This shows you that what has been happening around the world, and you can see the massive increase in CO2 emissions out of China, India, rest of Asia, and United States has been relatively stable, yet we've had enormous economic growth, and we're going to get to that in a second. Next slide. Okay. You know, there's a lot of talk about extreme weather events. I grew up in California. We've had fires and floods there for a long time. There's absolutely no evidence that there may be problems with rising temperatures from climate. We're not going to have that debate today, but in terms of extreme weather events, we've had them in California for hundreds of years. We just have a lot of people moving into the way of these events, and we have very, very poor management of our water systems and our fire systems and our land. This is a question, this is really not a function of climate. And we have a lot of policymakers who use climate as a get-out-of-jail-free card. If you are an executive running the state of California, you are responsible for having competent policies to manage fire risk, to manage flood risk. That's a longer conversation. Maybe we can have that later. Next slide. Okay. One of the interesting things is that the pace of sort of reshoring of manufacturing facilities, electric vehicles, data centers has spiked spiked power demand in the U.S. And you can see from this chart, this is JP Morgan data, but you can see in this chart from about going back to 1990s, it grew a bit, but we have this spike now. We have this big spike in power, and guess what? We do not have the capacity to make that with so-called intermittent power. We're going to need to deploy the vast gas resources that we have. Next slide. This shows the change in commercial electricity sale between 2013 and 2023. Look at Texas. Now, part of that is electrifying the Permian Basin, all the oil wells. If you haven't seen the TV series called Landman, I really recommend it to you. And then you can see Virginia. Now, why did Virginia get a big spike? Well, Virginia is where all the big fiber optic cables come together, where the latency is very short, and people want to build data centers in that area. Now, they've become, the pressure for building new data centers are so big now, the big developers have decided they are not going to hook up to the U.S. grid. They're going to put these independently. They're going to get close to the gas supplies, Texas, Louisiana, wherever they can find them. And they're going to, Exxon, for example, Exxon Power. Exxon Power can build a 1 megawatt facility. They can do it at 99.99% availability, and you don't have to hook up to the grid. And there's plenty of gas in Texas. Next slide. The other question is that we're going to go into the modern era, and we are going to use this data. We are going to need lots of power. If you look at this figure here, you can see that data centers alone, worldwide data centers alone, with some crypto and transmission networks, they are now equivalent to the 6th largest country in the world in terms of power demand. Power demand is, if we are going to progress, we're going to need to build a lot of power. And by the way, this is the problem in Africa. International financial institutions have voted against and prohibited fossil fuel development in Africa. This is actually a human tragedy, because you cannot industrialize without dense, large volumes of dense energy, and wind and solar does not generate that kind of power. Next slide. It's important to look at, we've spent about, in the last 20 years, corporate money, government money has spent about $9 trillion to deploy renewable power. Yet, take wind and solar, it's less than 7%, closer to 4 or 5%. It's a colossal amount of money at a very low yield. And you can see here, so if you look here, this is a forecast from the IEA, from 2001 to 2004. You look at that distance there, which is a 25% increase in the forecast for 2050. And you see that small green bar? That's the entire amount of power that was generated from wind and solar. We have a lot of capacity, but capacity doesn't count unless you're using it. Next slide. Okay, let's start the animation on this. This is a great story from California. This shows you over time what happens to something called the duck curve as you continue to deploy vast amounts of intermittent power. And so you can sort of force the system, right? You can force the system, but you see what's going on here. And if you look at California and Florida, which had roughly the same price of electricity 20 years ago, today the price of electricity in Florida is about 14 cents a kilowatt hour. It's 35 cents in California. Managing intermittent power is very expensive. Next slide. Okay. So I think Kevin sort of alluded to this, but what this shows is what would happen if the entire OECD went to net zero by 2050? By the way, that's an impossible task. It's totally unrealistic. It's not going to happen. But we ran the models on what it would be. And what's interesting is that even if the entire OECD went to net zero by 2050, total emissions in 2050 would be probably just a little bit less than where they are today. So just from a policy point of view, you have to ask yourself, okay, we're going to put a ton of money, we're going to cripple our economies, we're going to have low economic growth and wealth creation. Is it worth it? Next slide. So this is very interesting. So the U.S. gets criticized for a lot of things it does in climate, that it doesn't do enough, but back up one slide. As you can see here, this shows you the change in net capacity over, I guess it's maybe the last 10 years. And you can see that the U.S. actually reduced had a net increase in total coal power plant additions of 95, but look at Asia. It makes sense. Asia needs a lot of power, it needs reliable power, it needs on-demand power, and it chooses coal. We have a very large project with our Japanese colleagues to sort of proliferate LNG throughout the South Asia. It still is it's coming along, but it's a long process. Next slide. This shows the average change in annual CO2 emissions in the G20. Note, U.S. is the most successful in reducing its emissions. It's not because of wind and solar. It's just because we deployed lots of cheap gas for lots of coal. Next slide. We have massive reserves of gas. Anybody who's interested in buying LNG or thinking about long-term gas plays in the U.S., there's no shortage of gas. In fact, we have so much associated gas in Texas, Louisiana. And associated gas is gas that comes up the wellbore when you produce oil. You're not looking for the gas, it just comes up with it. I saw a major CEO of a major oil company in the Permian Basin told me that gas has to go to negative $25 on MMBTU before he will slow down his oil production. So we're looking for uses for that gas, and I think we're going to find them. Next slide. Production growth, you can see the production growth in the U.S. It's been enormous, and it's a terrific strategic advantage. Next slide. So you can see this shows you the kind of merit curve, if you like, or the schedule for LNG. The Biden administration, I think, very foolishly put this pause on, not because the pause had a substantive effect in actual deployment. It created a shift in expectations that shifted the opportunities for the Qataris versus the U.S. Next slide. This shows the progress in U.S. LNG export terminals. We'll go through these quick. Next slide. And I'll make all these available to everyone. You can see, one of the things is, actually this is a matter of government policy. When they put the pause on LNG exports in the Biden administration, someone told them that it might help them get some votes from young people. So I went out on the street with one of my kids and said, let's ask some Gen Zers what LNG is. None of them knew what it even was. It was like a foolish political thing in my. But the interesting thing is, when you think about government policy, you want policies which are robust against uncertainty. We do not know exactly what the future looks like. And the notion that some bureaucrats can set the schedule for the next 30 years is absolutely bizarre in my mind. We have a marketplace, capital markets can allocate this capital in an appropriate way. Next slide. So I think this is our last slide, but you can see global coal consumption versus U.S. net gas exports. And the reason I show this one is that we had a bunch of people in the U.S. that said, you know, we're exporting too much gas. It's not going to be good for the climate. And I said, well, chances are when this gas goes out, it's going to be substituting for coal, even either new coal or old coal. And if you take a look at this chart, you can see that it's a very foolish idea. If the U.S. can produce more gas and distribute it around the world and provide opportunities for wealth creation and more energy availability, we should do it, and we should do it as much as we can. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou.